because the things that mattered were right in front of me. I thought I have to think gear down, carb heat, first notch of flaps, airspeed, making my base turn appropriately, keeping my turn so I'm not getting too slow in a turn. That's the stuff that you can easily miss when your brain gets pulled into a conversation. And I'm not saying that ATC was wrong by asking. They weren't. They were trying to be helpful. I'm saying the moment demanded something really specific from me. It demanded that I protect my attention so I can get the plane down and focus on what mattered. Now, what I'm thinking about constantly since then. Hello and welcome to the Chris Wolfe Podcast on iCode Media. Today, I want to talk about a flight and relate that flight to some things I see in clinical practice myself and also as a consultant as I work with other practices. And, today I'm going to talk about an emergency in flight, not a true emergency, but basically one step closer to a real emergency. It was this last week. I was on a short flight from Kearney to Blair, which is about a 44-minute flight with the tailwinds I had. Not a long trip, but the kind where you're already thinking about what you're going to do when you land, getting home early as opposed to when I would have driven, and kind of excited to be home because it had been a number of days of evening meetings. And so I was on an IFR flight plan, an instrument flight plan, but the weather was fine. I was not in the clouds. It was clear enough. And so because I was outside and I could see outside, everything was normal. So please enjoy this monologue. I'll get into the details in a second. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us. The most common questions I get include, what ophthalmological codes or evaluation and management codes should I use? What ICD-10 codes do I need to bill with this CPT code? What CPT codes can be billed together and what can't? And my favorite, how do I manage a patient who has diabetes who comes in for a quote-unquote routine eye exam? These questions really highlight the confusion and uncertainty that serves as a daunting hurdle for providers, makes it more challenging for them to care for their patients and provide those patients with the best opportunity for a lifetime of ocular health and clear vision. That's why we built iCode Education, for this specific purpose. Our mission is to provide optometrists with resources to help you understand disease states, revenue cycles, and billing and coding so that you can put that on autopilot and truly care for your patients. Check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. We've developed a premier billing and coding bundle that includes all of our billing and coding resources in one place. We also have a 10% discount code just for listeners of this podcast. Enter the coupon code EYECODEMEDIA22 at checkout. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. Historically, managing floaters has been tricky, but we've started recommending Vitreous Health because it aligns with the physiology of the vitreous, reducing free radical damage within that gel. Patients appreciate having a non-surgical option that sets the stage for a long-term relationship built on education rather than frustration. It's a simple addition that's helped us guide patients through a condition that often feels helpless for them. So there I was climbing out of Kearney, and on the climb out, I started noticing I was above pattern altitude, which is about 1,000 feet above the ground, and I was turning on course to Blair, and my audio panel started to flicker. So there's a lot of static. I could hear the calls being made, and I was switching over from the local area traffic in Kearney up to Minneapolis Center, which is ATC. So that's who we talked to. And I'm going to give you some context for those who are not pilots who are listening. And as I'm starting to notice these flickers, I know something's not right. We've got an older plane, and sometimes you get little staticky. It doesn't really mean a lot, but this was different. And when I think about the display, so the next thing that kind of happened was the display started flickering, and there's this feeling that kind of something doesn't look right. And my brain starts immediately trying to solve it. Like, okay, well, am I looking at my normal flight displays, the things that aren't necessarily controlled by the electronics? They're all working well. So, I know that the plane's flying the way it should be flying. Our airspeed is good. We've got a good climb rate. And the thing that immediately kind of goes through is, all right, there's something that's going on. Maybe so I start to unflicker some of the buttons. I unswitch some of the buttons that I had turned on. So one is called pitot heat, which is basically there's a little tube on the side of the airplane, usually under the wing, that measures the amount of air that's flowing into that system. It tells you how fast your airplane is moving through the air. And the reason we would use pitot heat, and the reason that I had it on, was because I was expecting that we may be flying through some clouds, and it was cold enough where in that system it could cause freezing. And if you have freezing in that system, then water molecules can build up and there's no air that gets pushed through there. And that would be definitely terrible. You wouldn't know if your plane is flying, your airspeed would drop to 0. You wouldn't know if your plane is flying at 150 miles an hour or 10 miles an hour. And so, that's one of the things I had on, one of the things I don't usually fly on unless I'm expecting that. And so I thought, okay, well, let me flip that off. Maybe that's an issue. And I remember catching myself, going into like, just fly the airplane. Don't get yourself dragged into the problem too early. So I continued to do what I could do without distracting myself. I climbed to my assigned altitude, which is 7,000 feet. And once I was stable, I started working through more of those issues. So I toggled off the radio on and off. I checked the fuses. I unplugged headsets. I turned off non-essential electronic things in the airplane. And I shut off I left the pitot heat off because I wasn't in the clouds and I didn't want to waste anything. And really nothing changed. If anything, it really got worse. And so, I on my climb out, probably if I were going to do something different, I would have turned right back to Kearney. You'll see that as this story goes on, I would have avoided some of the temptation or to continue to press on. If I could have avoided that earlier, I could have made the landing scenario a lot easier. But I didn't. I made the decision later on, but I should have turned back right at that point back to Kearney even before I was at my altitude. Because I knew something wasn't right. And really halfway between, I kept checking my amps, and the amps are a indicator of the amount of electricity that the engine is pushing through the alternator and then charging up the battery. So all of your electrical components of the airplane are run by the battery. And after you turn the engine on, the engine doesn't need the battery. It's one of these redundancies. So the reason the alternator is there is to turn the power of the engine into electricity, which can power your electronics inside of the airplane. And I kept checking that really early on. As soon as I noticed the staticiness of the radios, the first thing I looked at was the amps. And the amps looked good. But then I noticed when I was kind of halfway from Kearney to Grand Island, which is about I'm going to mess the exact distance up, but it's about 15 minutes at the most in the airplane, maybe even less than that. And so it's probably 30 to 40 miles from each other. And so I noticed my amps were at 0. And if you've ever had that moment where you realize it's not just an annoying glitch, it's a system, the whole mindset shifts. And now, because it's not troubleshooting for comfort, we're really troubleshooting with a clock. And so I started shutting down, obviously, all the other interior lights, anything that really didn't need, because I wanted to preserve that battery. And in my head, I'm doing the math, and I'm thinking at the time, probably wrongly, but I'm thinking, I remember, okay, 30 minutes. My battery has 30 minutes of life. And I really only need to get 10 minutes to get on the ground. So I've got some margin. But it's something that I can't really waste. And the other thing is, the last time I checked my amps was on run up. So, when you're starting the airplane, you go to taxi, and then you go through run up checks. So you increase the power of the airplane, you make sure the manifold pressure is doing what it's supposed to do. You turn off your magnetos, you pull the prop, so you're moving some warm oil through that whole system, making sure the prop is going to adjust the way you want it to adjust. And you do specifically check your amps, and I made a note specifically that I checked my amps, which is part of my checklist. I always do it. And it was positive. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, I've got 30 minutes from when that started, but I was probably less than that, honestly. And you'll see that it winds up being less than that. So after that, I requested a deviation from Blair to Grand Island. And I let them know, hey, I'm having a problem with my electronics. Mostly it's impacting my radios, and the tower was closed in Grand Island, and ATC cleared me down to Grand Island. I don't need the tower to land, for those of you who aren't pilots. When the tower's closed, you can still land at the airport. So they had me switch over to the local traffic frequency, which is just when the tower's closed, you're just talking to other airport traffic. So other pilots who are around who might be trying to land. That way you know where other pilots are and they know where you are. One thing we really appreciate about the MyDay multifocal lens is how often we get a successful fit on the first attempt. The design is predictable, the fitting guide is super straightforward, and patients adapt quickly, even those who've struggled with multifocals in the past. So in my practice, reducing chair time and improving outcomes go hand in hand. And this lens helps both of those things happen for our patients. Check it out for yourself. MyDay multifocal. If you're ready to stop feeling overwhelmed and start running a safer, more profitable practice, here's the next step. First, book a strategy call with us, Practice Performance Partners. We'll uncover the biggest risks and opportunities in your practice. Then, choose the package that fits your goals. From there, we'll get you launched with confidence, with clear systems, with expert support, and with peace of mind, knowing your practice is protected and set up to grow. Don't wait until something goes wrong. Book your strategy call with us, Practice Performance Partners, today. And I could see the airport beacon. And so my process was I switched over to the common area frequency. I announced myself, and I said something about being 12 miles to the southwest of Grand Island. And I'm going to enter a left downwind on runway 17. I was going to cross over midfield, enter a left downwind on 17. So I'm telling other area traffic that what my plans were. The next thing I did without even really thinking about it, it's just one of these automated systems, was if you flick your microphone, so your push to talk button, it's the microphone that allows you to talk on the radios. If you push that button 5 times, and you just kind of click it until you see the runway lights come on, you'll turn runway lights on. So at nighttime, when it's totally dark and there's not a tower, or there's not a tower that's open, you can turn on runway lights. And so had I not done that at that time, it would have probably escalated my workload significantly. So the runway lights came on, I could see the runway. So not only could I see the airport by the beacon, but I could see the runway now. And that's when I made my call. And then right after that, I did that, the Garmin system, which is the GPS system, basically lost power as well. And that also controls the frequency that I use for my number 1 radio. And my number 2 radio had failed, so I couldn't even tell what frequency was on the number 2 radio. I also fly with a handheld radio, and I didn't have to reach for it. So that would have been my last backup system had I not had the runway lights. I would have had to plug in my handheld radio, tune that in. I probably would have had to fly around. It would have taken some other attention, and I would have been able to turn on the runway lights that way. But again, you're kind of stacking upon stacking. So the Garmin system was out, and the normal comms, the normal radio communications at that point had disappeared. And the only thing that it did, which I didn't realize until after I made some calls, is it reverts the main communication radio into a frequency that's 121.5, which is an emergency frequency. And I didn't realize that's what happened. I was just talking to the people in the traffic pattern. So I was making announcements after that first one. And then in my next couple of calls, I didn't mean to, but I was calling emergency. And then I said that I'm crossing over midfield. I'm entering a left downwind. So this is my next call. I announced 5 miles out. And then I announced when I was crossing over midfield. And then as I'm crossing over midfield, I get a guy that jumps on and says, 5674 Quebec, you are talking to guard. And I said, I'm talking to guard. I was certain that I had changed over, and I knew I had because I was able to turn the lights on. But I could see the runway, And by then, the failure wasn't subtle. I didn't have any interior lighting. My navigation systems were down. I didn't have a landing light. The only lights I had were the strobe lights, which were not flickering on the wingtips. They're the green and the red lights and the little flickers, the white lights that go with them that can show other airplanes where you are. And those were going, but they were going not at the normal rate of what I was seeing. And I did have the communication. The last thing to go out was the COM 1. So I had strobes and COM 1, but I could see the runway, and it meant that I wasn't guessing where the airport was. I wasn't hunting for it. I wasn't having to get cute or find anything else. I could just fly into the pattern just like I normally would at night and land the airplane. And the weirdest part of all of that was the flare. Without normal visual cues, I couldn't tell if I was 2 feet above the ground or 5 feet above the ground. And it sounds like a small difference, but when you're there, and that's not something that I've ever trained for. I've trained to have emergencies, lots of emergencies, but no landing light in the dark. I could see that I was in the middle of the runway, but I'm just trying to feel the airplane settle. And I remember thinking, don't fight it, don't chase it, don't try to get cute with getting onto the ground. Just keep it stable and let it land. And it did. And it was a smooth landing. It was a controlled landing. And honestly, it was a great landing. But it was one of those moments where you realize how much your training just carries with you when your brain is starting to get a little bit more scattered. And I remember focusing, settle down, concentrate, control what you can control. And I got off the runway and everything finally quit. So strobes were gone. COM was gone. Everything was gone. The airplane was still running because remember, the engine still runs even without electricity. But it's weird. It's really weird. And so, I kind of exhaled. I called to cancel my IFR. So they're still protecting that space for me because I was on an IFR flight plan. So anybody that was coming in or out of that airport on an IFR flight plan would have been told to hold someplace else until I told them that I was down safely. So here's the part that I didn't expect. The thing that stuck with me wasn't the static or the landing or even the systems going dark. It was the way people tried to help near the end. Once the system had kicked me to the emergency frequency, a lot of people had started talking to me who weren't the ones actively working with my flight anymore. And they were trying to be helpful. They were trying to do the right thing. They were asking for details. Where are you exactly? Where's your location? What's your airport code so I can give you the right frequency, confirm this, confirm that, normal questions, reasonable questions. But I was in the pattern and I knew I had a couple minutes, probably 2 minutes literally from being on the ground. And I remember having to consciously decide I'm not going to spend my attention answering their questions and it's not going to change the outcome right now. So what I told them was I can't do anything. I can't answer anything. I'm in the pattern. I'm having a total electrical system failure. I need to fly the plane. And that told him everything he needed to know. And it wasn't rude. He didn't take it personally. He just said there's nothing else he could do in his mind. He stopped asking me questions. There was nothing else he could do at that point to assist. So he said, let us know when you get down. And so, cancel. Don't forget he actually said, don't forget to cancel your IFR when you're on the ground. Because the things that mattered were right in front of me. I thought I have to think gear down, carb heat, first notch of flaps, airspeed, making my base turn appropriately, keeping my turn so I'm not getting too slow in a turn. That's the stuff that you can easily miss when your brain gets pulled into a conversation. And I'm not saying that ATC was wrong by asking. They weren't. They were trying to be helpful. I'm saying the moment demanded something really specific from me. It demanded that I protect my attention so I can get the plane down and focus on what mattered. Now, what I'm thinking about constantly since then is the context of practice, because we run into the same trap. Just nicer, better lighting, and maybe not as demanding with minutes to make decisions. But, a patient comes in late, or they call and they're upset and they want to be seen right away, or we've got a schedule that's already packed, and then somebody urgent drops in, or an emergency comes into your practice. And I know a lot of practices that, when their schedule's full of comprehensive exams, they will shift their call over to call centers, or they won't take call out after hours. They'll shift them to somebody else. And so, if you're anything like me, there's this reflex that kicks in and says, well, if we can't do everything in the normal ideal workup, what are we even doing? Like if somebody comes in for a dry eye evaluation and we're normally doing the full process, history, tear breakup time, tear meniscus height, staining, photos, osmolarity, inflammatory, all the, everything that we want, the ideal. And then reality happens. The patient's late. We're short-staffed. Sally's not there. We're squeezed for time. Somebody else pops in. So the question is, do we have time to do all of it at that moment? Or can we still take care of the patient without pretending that we're in a perfect world appointment slot? Because here's what I think about now. It's the job in those moments aren't to recreate the ideal workflow. The job is to figure out what matters right now and what can wait until we have time and space to do it well. That might mean do the parts of the exam that keep us from missing something serious. Make sure we're not ignoring red flags. A patient comes in with a red eye that we know is probably due to ocular surface, inflammation secondary to meibomian gland dysfunction, but we can treat them now. We decide we can safely start today to get them uncomfortable. We don't have to get meibography, and we don't have to get tear meniscus height, and et cetera, et cetera. We can just help the patient feel better now. And then once we help them feel better now, we make sure there's nothing else going on, no lesions on the cornea, herpetic lesions, ulcers, those sorts of things, right? But then we can have them back to make sure that their acute problem is under control, but then we can do a full diagnostic evaluation once we can actually do it properly when we've given them the time to do it. So it's not lowering our standard, really. It's just about being honest about sequencing. What matters now when the time is critical? And it's the same thing as the airplane. If I had to try to satisfy every single request coming in over the radio, just to be cooperative, just to be thorough, I could have missed something that really mattered more. I could have missed the flaps. I could have missed the gear. I could have a whole bunch of things, obviously. I could have been off glide slope and then trying to press for power and then land, with a lot of extra airspeed and bounce the airplane and had to go around. There are all sorts of things that could have gone on. And so in practice, if we try to force that full protocol every single time, no matter what the situation is, we can end up doing something similar. We can spend our limited time on parts that make the visit feel complete to us, but we miss the parts that actually keep the patient safe and move them forward. Some of that might even be communication. It might even be not so much keeping the patient safe, but did I spend so much time on all the widgets and devices and processes that we love to have, instead of just being able to connect with the patient about their problems and look it in the eye and say, this is how we're going to solve this today, and we're going to follow up at some other point in time. So I've started thinking about these things in a couple buckets. What do I need to do to take good care of this patient today, given the reality we're in? And what would make the visit even better that I can do on follow-up when we're not rushed, when we can plan for it? And I'll tell you what I'm working on next. Obviously, building this simple kind of late, urgent add-on or, kind of playbook for our practice and our team, and obviously other practices and other teams where we're working with that isn't improvising when we get squeezed. I was able to focus on checklists the whole time. Okay, I look at the checklist. What do I need to look for? What's the then final checklist? These are the things that are critical. Not a lesser pathway, just a very clear pathway. Because when things get tight, the worst feeling is this sense of chaos, like you're either going to do everything or do nothing. But there's a middle path, and it's usually and often the best path when things get tight. Anyway, that's the story. Short flight, a long lesson. And I'm still thinking about that moment in the pattern when the noise was coming in and the only thing that mattered was the next small step, which was land the airplane. Take care of the patient, protect my attention. I hope this was helpful. We'll see you guys on the next one.